Hi everybody, Jared O'D here from Dynamis, and today I want to introduce to you Sarah Naish and a conversation that I had with her recently. Sarah is an author and an expert on therapeutic parenting, and we've been working together for a while on strategies for parents who are at home and have to deal with managing violent behavior from children. Now, Sarah, as you can see, has been publishing books for many years now, which are really useful for both parents and children to understand the very powerful feelings that can emerge when a child who's got a traumatic background or has experienced real adversity as they've been developing can present with behaviors that are very difficult for adults and parents to understand and deal with. And that's really why I think this is going to be interesting for you today. Some of our teaching colleagues and our schools are going to be really interested in what is going on here. Now, most recently, Sarah's published the A to Z of Therapeutic Parenting Strategies and Solutions. This is a fantastic resource in a fantastic format, which should help anybody dealing with these kinds of behaviors to go and get strategies really easily and quickly and be able to put their hands on something that might be helpful. And as you can see here, the reviews from people who are actually using these strategies and going to look for therapeutic approaches to dealing with the behaviors they're managing with the children. The reviews are just fantastic. People are finding this such a great resource, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you to meet Sarah in this conversation today. Without further ado, I'm going to start rolling this conversation that I had with Sarah recently. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll come back to you briefly when this conversation is over.
This isn't a formal training thing or anything like that, so don't panic, everyone. You don't have to get your pens and papers out. We're going to have our cups of tea and just have a chat. We just want to really let you know about some of our very exciting work we're doing around managing violent behaviour, and in particular around what we can offer schools. So, Gerard, do you want to kick off?
Sure, yeah. So I guess a little bit of background would be helpful first, wouldn't it, Sarah? We met about, I don't know, is it 2 years ago now? Is it as long as that? And discussed that we know that lots of foster carers in particular around the country are struggling with this whole sort of last taboo of parent or child to parent violence in the home. And you and I discussed what some of the solutions to that might be, and the result of that was our kind of jointly delivered course on managing violent behavior. And we've done many of those now at this point around the country, and we're getting really good feedback and results from them. So I wanted to, in January, now that the dust has settled a little bit on a really busy year last year, to just sort of get together and have a chat about what we've found out, what we've learned. And then, because a lot of our work is in schools helping the teachers to deal with behaviors, to ask you a little bit about your work in schools as well, and how you help both the teachers and the parents to support children who are having a hard time at school. So that's a lot really, but that's what I'd like to touch on today with you.
Cool. Well, we've been doing a lot of work with schools. It's become increasingly needed. I would say over 50% of the inquiries we get are around schooling, school issues, particularly parents trying to manage schools. And on the other hand, Inspire Training go out and do a lot of training to schools. I'm doing a conference next week to some head teachers. So schools are really struggling to manage the children's behaviour in schools. A lot of them don't use therapeutic parenting techniques, and some are attachment aware and some aren't. On top of that, of course, there's a big conflict between what the schools are doing and then what therapeutic parents are doing at home. So we know from the courses we've run in managing violent behaviour, because we use therapeutic parenting techniques, we know that it's very, very effective and parents are feeling much more empowered. But of course, if they're then going off to school and having a completely different set of boundaries, completely different set of management, really, then it can't work.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the first things I really learned from our interactions, was that often you have these situations arising where it's the management, the old school management styles or the methods that teachers would be used and even trained to use would actually be counterproductive for a child who's got, significant trauma or attachment problems. So what's a good example of one of those, would you say?
Well, for example, we know that children with a background of developmental trauma have invariably high cortisol levels, which is often misinterpreted as ADHD. So, for example, a child might be in a classroom working or trying to work, trying to concentrate, and something might happen. It could be something really small, like a loud bang, or somebody walking past the classroom. The child, because they've got high cortisol levels already, has an immediate spike, and the child goes into fight, flight, freeze, defensive rage. So what that child might do is they might feel compelled to rush out the door. So this is something that we hear a lot, and they're going to push anything out of the way in order to get out the door. So that's often misinterpreted by the school as the child being aggressive or violent because they're pushing people out the way to get through the door. And often the child has no memory of that. So a lot
Mm,
of that is covered, isn't it, in our de-escalation stuff that we do.
absolutely, yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that because when we go to schools and teach positive handling tactics for the teachers, this one often comes up. Every school in England has what they call the runners, which is children who try to leave the classroom or the school building. And my advice to them often is, to get better fences. So, a child really wants to leave a classroom. The way I would interpret that is that they're in panic and they're in full flight. So there's something in that classroom that's really set them off, has really triggered them and escalated things. So the last thing you want to do is contain that child in that space if opening a door to the classroom at least is safe enough.
Yeah.
And really the main concern is that the child can't get out of the school premise or can't get off school premises,
Mm.
and thereby in a tizzy run in front of a car or something like that. So it's kind of interesting that you say that, but because we would normally advise teachers to let that child to escape the classroom if they really needed to.
Absolutely, and that's what we say in our when we do some training. We have like flight strategies, because a lot of the violence comes about when the child can't exit, as you know, Gerard. And
Yeah.
we give a lot of very simple strategies in our training with schools. We give a lot of simple strategies around, because I think often schools are told what they can't do, and they're not
Mm-hmm.
told what they can do. That's the problem, and also what they need to do. So a lot of what we cover is around, well, this is how the child is interpreting the world, and this is how they're feeling. And once you get that, the strategies become a lot easier actually to manage, I think.
Yeah, I think seeing things from the child's perspective is so critical, and but seeking to understand their perspective is really an important first step for the teachers and the staff. Everybody's busy these days. The schools are under pressure,
Mm.
um, and I think taking the time to really get under the hood of what's happening with the child is often left out because everybody's in a rush, right?
Yeah.
Um, it was interesting. I had a conversation with a friend of mine just the other day, and she said um, that she was called to school to have a multidisciplinary team meeting. Everybody was going to be there, the head teacher, the inclusion manager, everybody. And when she got there, none of those people were there. There was one person at the meeting with her, right? So
Yeah.
that's the same thing. And then they came up with some strategies, and somebody said it's not this thing, it's something else, right? So they came up with some diagnosis of what was going on with this young fella who doesn't want to come to school in the mornings. And then the next day she turns up at school and she meets the class teacher who wasn't at the meeting. And sure enough, the class teacher has a completely different idea of what's going on. There's no
Mm.
consistency between the staff team, if you like. And then when you haven't got that consistency, you've got a child in the middle who's, I guess, getting lots of different
Mm.
strategies being used with them, and that just can't be helpful.
No, indeed. And what we're finding is that, of course, because the children's cortisol levels are higher in school anyway than they are at home, often the behaviours that we see um, in the home environment are magnified at school. So what we're trying to do is we want to get much more joined up working between parents and teachers, so that everyone's on the same page really, and everyone's understanding because if you're using therapeutic parenting techniques or therapeutic teaching, and you're on the same page, the child's going to feel a lot safer and be more contained. So a lot of the parents, for example, that have been on our managing violent behaviour courses have found that since doing the course, they don't need to use any of the strategies because,
Mm.
in fact, they're feeling safer and more confident. That's communicated to the child that they're more confident. They're not scared of the child, which is very important. So the incidents dramatically reduce. I think, we often find that, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah. It's something that's been a feature of our work for years, which is that when we teach people physical strategies and how to manage things when they're just about to get under control. So, if you like, many courses that people will go to teach de-escalation strategies and verbal communication strategies and so on, and they're hugely important. But often they stop at that point and they go, well, if it goes if the incident becomes violent after this point, then well, the best of luck, or do your best, or
Yeah,
even worse, as we know,
yeah.
um, they're told that they're not allowed to protect themselves or they're not
Mm,
allowed to touch the child, and
yeah,
that creates all sorts of anxieties and fear,
yeah,
which then for us would say it impacts on how well they do during the communication phase.
mm,
So the great thing about doing some physical skills work with these parents has been, as you say, that they increase in confidence and then they persevere longer when they're, employing those therapeutic parenting strategies that you guys teach and
yeah,
that we teach jointly on the course. So yeah, there's a real story there, I think, um, about the confidence levels. So many times I've sat in the room with you
yeah,
and the parents are talking about how afraid they are.
yeah,
And they're afraid of all kinds of things. They're afraid of what the professionals are going to say. They're afraid of what might happen at school when the child talks about what happened at home. They're afraid of their own reactions. There's just an awful lot of talk about fear. So it's a really interesting area to work in, isn't it?
yeah. And they get that. I think that a lot of the things. When I put up, Sarah Dillon and I recently did a little video, a little overview of managing violent behaviour in our members group in the National Association of Therapeutic Parents. And one of the main things that came up time after time after time was, but our agency says we're not allowed to touch the child. Well, I was able to reassure people and point them over towards the page, Gerald Dynamis, and say, "Well, read this, and don't take my word for it. If you're on the course, that's all explained to you because we know that like you said, there's a lot of courses around there that stop short. And as an adopter, know that when you're in that situation where you have and hope for the best. And you've got to be sure and confident about that when you do it. And that's what our course does. And it's the only one, by the way, that is underpinned by therapeutic parenting principles because we think that it's very important to preserve the dignity of the child and the relationship. You've got to carry on, looking after this child afterwards. So, we're not doing anything that's interrupting that.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's been so interesting to talk to the parents about that that moment they have where they're feeling challenged about they're so committed to being therapeutic in their approach,
Mm.
and then they have a moment where they're feeling threatened, physically threatened, and they're still trying to be therapeutic. And there's that balance, isn't there, about being protected yourself so that you can then be effective in deploying those therapeutic approaches afterwards.
Yes.
Um, I think one of the interesting things that I recall just now as we're talking about it is the fact that we've had parents say to us that the children themselves, if they do have a very out of control moment and they become violent, that it deepens their feelings of shame and hurt afterwards.
Mm.
So in a way, allowing the child to be violent and so on is compounding some of the problems that we're having. Whereas stopping it sooner and in a smart and intelligent way can really help with, I suppose, embedding newer behaviors and helping the child to deal with those feelings.
Yeah. And I can see that we've got a few people that are logged on and they're asking some
Mm-hmm.
questions. Linda, who I've met, hi Linda. She's has a very tricky situation. She's absolutely brilliant, very resilient, and works really hard, I know, to stay connected to your child. Um, and she's saying we get thumped, pushed, kicked daily, and it's scary for when he gets older and bigger. So I think that's something that's a really important point. You know, if we can get it right when the children are younger and slightly easier, it's going to be much easier later on. Do you think, Gerard?
Absolutely, yeah. And we've had, I think, the full gamut of people coming on our course, which is we've had, I think, at the very first course that you and I did together, we had
Yeah,
somebody in the room who had like a 3-year-old
that's right.
uh, child that they were having real problems with in terms of violence. And on the same course, we had a couple there who had a like 18-year-old in their home and they were having issues with. And the strategies are very different for those two groups of subject, if you like. Um, but for sure, setting those boundaries, those physical boundaries for feeling safe and protected earlier on, I think is going to be, that's where the win is.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We've also got someone just said, can you can you explain how to get schools to see and understand the emotional age of the child, not just the physical age? As obviously this has some impact on our children's behaviour too. Well, I mean, what I would say to that is that first of all, when we just go and do our most basic training for schools, you know, the conferences and the in-house school stuff, that's something that we always explain. Also, you know, that's certainly part of any schools training we do in MV, managing violent behaviour. And also, if you're a member of NATP, there's a download you can get, which is called understanding my traumatised child for schools. It's a letter for schools, and it's written to and it explains all about the emotional age versus the chronological age, and about how our children simply cannot do the things that people expect them to be able to do. So, you know, that's an important point. So,
Yeah, I think I'm seeing more awareness of that issue as I go around and talk very briefly on these subjects, but it's
mm,
not widespread. I think, when you've got specialists at a school, Senko and inclusion managers, for example, they have some awareness of that, but to my mind, the classroom teachers and the TAs aren't maybe getting enough support to understand that issue.
that's
They
right.
need the support.
And often what happens is the knee-jerk reaction is to exclude the child.
Hmm.
So often we see that children that are struggling to manage their big feelings and it comes out of violent behaviour ends up with the child being excluded, which is not a long-term answer or solution for anybody or anything. And I think it gives the child a clear message. I am frightening the teacher, because if the teacher's going out of my school, the teacher appears frightened. So that's going to in turn make the child feel unsafe. We've also had somebody ask, they're saying they're struggling with sibling on sibling violence between a 3 and a 4-year-old, and how do we stop that when they're still young? I'm going to take that one. So I know we're not going to actually do a demonstration, but
No, we're not going to do a demonstration, but I think that this kind of issue is really, as an advisor, my first thoughts here are about just the difficulty with separating fighting children in the first place. It's a very, very high risk activity for all kinds of reasons. So, one of the key things that you and I discussed very early on was the fact that carers, parents are often on their own when something happens in the house,
mm,
or they're on their own when it happens down at Tesco's or wherever it might be. And the issues around using force on your own to restrain somebody are that, well, it's just very high risk and it's linked with really negative outcomes. So even though the children in this case are just 3 and 4 years old, there's some cautions that we need to put in front of any tactical advice for that. What we teach on the course are some sort of low-level strategies for removing one of the children from the situation
mm,
and creating sort of space and time between them, so that they can, be de-escalated or de-escalate, by themselves. But I would suggest, and not to be too commercial about this, but like that issue, if the 3 and 4-year-old are really hurting each other, then that would be a really good note to say that person should probably come on a course and spend a day with us to
yeah.
explore what the issues are and to see them in real time.
I think that's a really important point, Gerard, because we've had a lot of people saying, sometimes on the Facebook groups that we run, we have a lot of people saying things like, my child hits and punches me, thumps me every day, attacks me, and, the expectation is that I can answer that in a Facebook post, in a comment, and that's not possible. The reason that we devised this 2-day course, which actually has taken many years of our joint experience to come up with, is
Yep.
because this is what people need. And I know, having been in that situation, working with a lot of parents who feel so disempowered and so desperate, and I'm sure teachers are feeling that way as well. You need to, prioritise getting on the course. It's 2 days out of your life, but it does change everything. It changes the dynamic, which is really important. I know, as an adopter, that if I not had the correct training myself, I don't know how I would have got my children safely to adulthood with our relationship intact. So, it's that fundamental. As a therapeutic parent, you are the unassailable safe base. If the child's kicking and punching you, you are not unassailable, you are unsafe. And if you're an unsafe parent, the children will feel unsafe. So there's no shortcut to that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, here. I absolutely agree with that. I don't think I could say it any better either.
Okay. I've just got another question here saying, our adopted daughter spends most waking hours kicking, punching, nipping, etc. We've started. Stop now. It's unacceptable. We love you. Well, that's around, yeah, because we do say, like, very importantly, which I can do very quickly. What you do say is, that's not okay. Stop it now. A lot of people think therapeutic parenting is about always being empathic and nurturing, and Rosie's sitting next to me. She would say, I was a strict parent, no mucking about, stop it now, that's not okay. Never would I have sat there and said, oh, please, darling.
Luckily we work together, so I understand now why.
So
and agree with it 100%.
And we've got here which says, my guy has come further in the 2 years he's been with my family than all the years he's been in foster homes, residential care, group homes. We are getting ready to discontinue his IEP at school. At 15, has become able to regulate himself in stressful situations and does not need extra support offered in his IEP. Great. So, once you're using those strategies and you're safe and you're confident, then there's no question that everything gets easier in your life. There's no question about that.
Absolutely. I think we had feedback. I mean, some of the feedback we've had from our course is that very quickly the relationships change for the better. And that idea that the person would use a protective intervention to set a boundary, a physical boundary with the child, can have a really positive effect on the relationship between the adult and the child. And I think you would say something along the lines of, it's proving to the child that you will look after them when they are losing control of themselves. Yeah, very, very important.
Lily has just commented, having had the training, I can honestly say I can support my child through most behaviour. It is only in school that she displays a highly aggressive behaviour. So that's someone who's been on the course and is now able to manage. And I do know this person, and I know the behaviour she's talking about. And yes, I can see. So it's interesting there, Lily, that you are able to contain your daughter or your child. And and at school that all goes out the window, and that's really kind of the bridge that the gap we're trying to bridge, I think. Yeah,
I think so. There's the bridge in the middle, I think, is that we have to encourage the school staff to listen, to really listen. I hear it so often on our course, and also from parents and even teachers that would say to me, what I mean is actually senior leadership at the schools, when they have to deal with an incident that's happened, there's a parent who's upset or there's a teacher who's upset about a child and they're looking for exclusion. In the middle there, often the most experienced people at a school will say, what didn't happen here was that they didn't listen to the child's behavior. So people sort of jumping to conclusions, really. And I think that's the piece. So Lily's probably figured out quite a lot of things about the child's triggers and what sets them off and how to deal with them. but it's then getting the school to implement those. And I think there's some really good work to be done there.
Yeah, and that's part of what we are doing. You know, that is our ongoing mission, really. Like I say, you know, we do quite a lot now of conferences, and where I can lay out the foundations of what we're trying to do. But I think now there's more of a need to get into the schools and give them the tools they need to support therapeutic parents and to make sure that child has consistent boundaries throughout, because something somewhere is going wrong. And what we hear the most of is teachers saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to carry this through. And parents saying schools don't get it. That's the two main messages that we hear. And I know that underneath often the expectation that we get more focused on behaviour. We do have the answers. I can assure you, we have the answers. You just need to kind of listen to us. You know, life gets easier, to be honest.
Absolutely. What's interesting as well, when we go to the schools and we talk about de-escalation, and our approach is it runs quite parallel to the therapeutic approaches that you teach on the Managing Violent Behavior course. What we see is that when we set a task for a group of teachers and we ask them to practice and show us how they do de-escalation, that the practice is just quite varied. You can have, you know, some really experienced staff at varying levels, from learning assistants through teaching assistants up to, you know, classroom teachers and so on. But it is quite varied, and so what that tells me is that de-escalation and something we call non-escalation isn't as widely embedded as it maybe should be.
Yeah,
So,
and I think I was going to say, Joe, I think the reason for that I've seen a few comments come up, but it's basically saying that the teachers don't understand, the agency teachers have no training, the school isn't listening. Problem with the school is their behalf is formulated and not responsive. Someone said to a head teacher that sending a child home when she told him to F off would mean that every time she wanted out, she would now have a tool to achieve that, which is right. I think that one of the things we see, though, time and time again, because I've been in this work a very long time, and what has happened is people have become very scared and much too risk averse. So no one is saying that we should go back to the days when you're grabbing hold of children and throwing them on the floor. And people keep thinking that that is what managing violent behaviour is about. And it's actually not that at all. So we have a lot of risk averse practice where we have social workers telling parents and teachers, you're not allowed to touch the child. Well, you know, what we're saying on our course is that's absolute rubbish. So
I'll tell you a story about one of the courses recently. Then I walked in first thing in the morning and I put a video of one of our, the example of what we're going to do today. So while I'm setting up, I have the video on just so that people can see. And somebody in the front row of our training course sort of pointed to the screen and said, if one of my foster carers did that, they'd be shot. As this is like 8:58 a.m. and I'm just about to start the training course. So I said to her, I said, really? She said, yeah, they'd be shot. I said it's a bit extreme, but anyway.
I take it
I
as
said,
a social worker.
Oh yes, yeah, for sure. And I said, listen, you wouldn't happen to have read the fostering regulations around restraint and use of force, would you? And she looked at me quite honestly and she said, no, I've never seen them. And that was the beginning of our training day. So by the end of the day, we'd had some interesting conversations and turned things around. Interestingly, just on that point, same course actually, there was some professionals there who said, we're trying to figure out whether we're comfortable with this training course. And, you know, it's all very interesting and so on. She said, but our focus is on keeping the foster carers safe. And so I said, great, that's my focus too.
Yeah.
But it's from different points of view. One is keeping foster carers safe from, I think, you know, allegations.
Yeah.
Which come after the incident. And from our perspective, we're trying to keep the foster carers safe so that they're physically safe, so that the children are physically safe, and then so that the relationship is safe, you know, because of course, as we know, one of the goals of the Managing Violent Behavior course is that placements, if I could use that word, aren't put in jeopardy because of this behavior.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's really key. It's a key goal for the course, is that relationships persevere longer and perhaps come out successful because people can cope.
Absolutely, because what we see a lot of in NATP as well is people saying, you know, the child was hitting me, da 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 da. I moved him, and now there's an allegation against me, and they're going to move the child. And you know, none of this is helpful for anyone. No, nothing. You know, if we are therapeutically parenting our children, the one thing they need is a parent who's going to stick by them no matter what, a parent who's not scared of them, and a parent who can handle themselves and handle the child's fears and anxieties. So if you're not able to do that, and you know, say you're protecting yourself and you've been taught how to do that properly and you do it properly, you know, you will have our full support. We know what we're talking about here. But as Gerard said, there's so many people out there that are just believing their own local policies, which say things like you're not allowed to touch the child. It's absolute rubbish. And you know, I can't say that enough times, really. You have to be able to protect the children and keep the children. You can't keep the children if you're terrified of them.
Absolutely. And in the background of all that is the kind of liability that the local authority or the fostering agency, the professionals involved, if they're giving bad advice on this topic, we sometimes say incompetent advice, then they open up their organizations to huge amounts of liability. And you know, on the Managing Violent Behavior resources page that anybody can go to, I've done a full sort of legal briefing on the position there. It's very clear, you know, there are certain responsibilities that these organizations have, particularly for foster carers, in helping them to stay safe when they're placing potentially violent children with them.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking that, Gerald, people watching this are going to want to know, I think, how to contact us and get more information, which Rosie can send out to them. I know you can as well. Rosie will put a link in the comments to this on this particular page. Rosie put a comment and a link to the Dynamis site with all the information about managing violent behaviour. And I think you're going to also put this elsewhere with links up as well too.
Yeah, absolutely. From our point of view, you know, it's very clear that we work in partnership with you guys. So when we get inquiries from foster carers who look for training, we send them straight to your Facebook pages and the NATP website, because we know that as a violence management sort of specialist provider, we can help people with that piece. But as you've been describing, and as I now know, the wraparound support that an organization like NATP can offer people is a very important part of the solution to the behavior. So I think whichever way people come to inquire about the course, they're going to end up back with you guys. So
yeah. I just wanted to add as well, Gerard mentioned earlier on about somebody who came to one of our first courses who had a 3-year-old child. And, you know, that sounds a little bit like sometimes we'll go all 3, you know, but we know the children that are born into trauma who are terrified can be terrifying. And this person was on the edge of an adoption disruption. She was on the edge of saying, I can't do this anymore, and the child's got to go. And you know, I know for a fact that that child is still there, and that training completely turned things around. And the child started obviously feeling secure, and that person is then like really helping us, and by saying how much better she feels and how much more secure the child is. We have just had a question about do we have an organisation in the UK? Well, yes. I mean, Gerard and I represent mainly 2 or 3 main organisations, which we'll put the link to. So, but we work together through Inspire Training Group in the Managing Violent Behaviour. And Rosie put the links in comments for you to follow later on. So, but yeah, we're definitely UK. I do go to the USA, and Gerard, I know, goes abroad as well. Yeah, but we do a lot of courses in. By saying how much better she feels and how much more secure the child is. We have just had a question about do we have an organisation in the UK? Well, yes. I mean, Gerard and I represent mainly two or three main organisations, which we'll put the link to. So, but we work together through Inspire Training Group in the Managing Violent Behaviour. And Rosie put the links and comments for you to follow later on. So, but yeah, we're definitely UK. I do go to the USA, and Gerard, I know, goes abroad as well. Yeah, but we do a lot of courses in the UK. So, okay, I don't think there's any other questions at the moment, just general comments, but no questions. Yeah. So, was there anything else you wanted to add, Gerard?
I don't think so. I think we've covered everything, including if Rosie gets that link out to everybody. I think that, you know, if somebody wants to follow up, just looking at my list of questions and things we could talk about, and I think we've covered everything. So
right, okay, all right. Okay, great. Well, lovely speaking to you all. I'm sure that we'll leave this video up for a little while so more people can watch it and you can re-watch it. If you've just caught the end of it, when Rosie finalises it, you'll be able to go back to the beginning and watch it from the start. So we'll leave it here for a little while and you can show it to whoever needs to with the comments below. Okay, take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.